the Cajun wrap from the local chipper. "2020 is here, and that means that your plans to visit Ukraine are on your mind." Well, this video is about a checklist of things you need to do in order to travel to Odessa, Ukraine for your first time. Now, this will generally work for anywhere in Ukraine, but we're talking specifically about Odessa because we're going to talk about specific restaurants, specific locations that have only to do with Odessa. So we're going to cover several topics. We're going to talk about when is a good time to travel, airfare and airlines, apartments, where and also where you want to stay, especially if this is your first time in Odessa, transfers to and from the airport, must-have phone apps, your first night and check-in. I'm going to give you some information about restaurants, taxis and how to get around Odessa, nightlife, where you can find some other English speakers, some really good tips for do this and don't do that. And like I said, we also put in there, because it's a little bit different, traveling to the airport rather than from the airport. Okay, so when to travel. High season versus low season. Every tourist place has a high season and a low season. Odessa is no different. Generally speaking, things kick off around the 7th of May. That's a holiday there, and everybody's off, and it's a little bit warm. It can still be a little chilly in May, in the early May. I've actually been snowed on the first week of April, so it can still be a little chilly the first week of May, but it's starting to get warm. People are outside, so that's when the season, quote unquote, kicks off. Now, the kids get out of school in June, and the difference between that and May is just the number of people on the street. Once the schools let out, that first couple of weeks or months, it is just wall-to-wall people, both locals and tourists. So just keep that in mind if that's what you want to. If you want to be in Odessa at the height of tourist season, because you want the energy, you want the excitement, you want full places, you want to see everything, then anytime after May 8th till about mid-August is going to make you happy. If you want to miss the crowds, you want to get there before May 7th, sometime, around April into May 7th. Now, again, it could be pretty chilly in April. And you can also accomplish the same thing by showing up sometime after September 1st when the kids go back to school, and anytime up until about mid-October. And you'll stay within some pretty decent weather. Okay, so flights. We're going to talk about coming from Europe and coming from the U.S. If you're coming from somewhere else, I don't have a whole bunch of info for you. Google Flights is your friend here. They'll help you figure it out. But I will say this: no matter where you're coming from, Turkish Airlines is probably going to be your cheapest flight in. Your second cheapest is probably going to be Ukraine Airlines, unless you're in Europe and you can get on something like Ryanair, a low budget, and they will probably be the least expensive. But not always, because you got to figure out all the bag fees and this, that, and the other that they charge extra for. And probably Turkish Airlines, for a lot of people, is still going to be the least expensive option. So if you're coming from Europe, you're looking at Ryanair or Turkish Airlines most likely. There are several other regional carriers that can do this for you and keep you within a budget. But the two that I look to most are Ryanair and Turkish Airlines out of Europe. Now, if you're coming from the U.S., I prefer Lufthansa. It's just a better airline. From where I am, I can go to an airport, have one stop in Munich, and then hit Kiev. I take the train from Kiev with friends. Now, some people might not like to do that. If you're new, this is definitely not what you want to do. So you're probably flying from either straight into Odessa or connecting through Kiev. And Lufthansa or Turkish Airlines can do that. Most likely, Turkish Airlines is going to drop you off right in Odessa. You're going to fly into Istanbul, and then from there, straight into Odessa. It's about a 2.5-hour flight from Istanbul. So, apartments. For most people, Airbnb comes to mind. Okay. So, there is a big push right now, at least in the U.S., with Verbo, trying to steal some market share from Airbnb. And there's some pretty good discounts going on, so you may want to look there. Lots of times it's the exact same apartments, so just do your due diligence there. Now, the dark horse in all this is Dovobo, Dovobo, Dovobo. This is the new player in town, and it is becoming very popular in Ukraine. The website lets you search just like Airbnb. It has more currency options. So I like it. I plan on using it my next trip. It would be my first time I've used Airbnb exclusively up to here, but I'm going to try Dovobo, and I'll give you an honest review when I'm done with that. Okay, so where to stay? If this is your first trip, stay on Deribasovskaya. That's the main street. That's the main city center avenue. That's the thoroughfare. That's where you're going to be able to see the opera house, where you're going to be able to walk around and people watch, where you're going to be able to move from restaurant to restaurant to cafe. You could stay for 2 weeks in Odessa and never leave Deribasovskaya and be satisfied that you had a pretty good time. Okay, so within about a block of there is where I suggest a first-timer stay, because everything is in walking distance. You're not going to have to concern yourself too much with transportation once you're there. Yes, you may want to go to the beach, easy enough. Yes, you may want to do some tourist things, easy enough. But generally speaking, most of what you will want to do, from breakfast to tea and coffee to dinner at a nice restaurant to nightlife, is all within walking distance of Deribasovskaya. So you're flying in to Odessa, you get through customs, you grab your bag, you walk through the doors, and if you've done any international travel at all, you understand the scene you're about to see. It's just wall-to-wall taxi drivers asking you if you want to ride. And the answer to that question is no. You need to have your airport transfer scheduled ahead of time. We are happy to help you with that. And if we can't help you, which we can, but you want to do something different, we suggest you use your apartment host, who will most likely offer to help you get from the airport to your new apartment. Now, that almost always works, but sometimes it can be a little bit of a pain, because some apartment owners own several apartments and they get someone to pick you up rather than do it themselves. And sometimes that person they are paying to pick you up rather than themselves is less than adequate. That's why I suggest you go with us. We'll make sure an English speaker picks you up and drops you off at your apartment, as opposed to some person who isn't busy and has been told to come pick you up, who may or may not speak English. Okay, so this one's important. 5 or 6 years ago, this wasn't so important. I would just say, hey, stick Google Translate on your phone. You're going to need it. All right. But now it's going to be how you get from A to B. Rideshare is in full force in Ukraine, just like everywhere else. You've got 2 great choices. The first one is Uklon, not Uklon. It's also, you can call it Ukraine, no problem, but it is Ukraine. But just call it Ukraine. Don't worry about it. Uklon, all right? Great taxi app. I do use it, but most people use, surprise, surprise, Uber. Now, here's the very important thing you need to know about Uber in Ukraine. You can use your card, no problem. It will be no problem to use it just like you would use at home. But you can also pay cash, which is very different than most places. And there's no difference in price. The price is settled just like it's settled when you use a card. It's no different, but you can definitely pay cash rather than card. Okay, so the next one is Google Translate. If you're not fluent in Russian or Ukrainian, you're going to need this app. Okay, just for looking at menus in case they don't have an English menu, or you say you want an English menu and they don't understand that you want an English menu, or you don't want to deal with the hassle. Just open up the local menu, and it's either going to be in Ukrainian or Russian. If you see an I, a letter I, it's Ukrainian. If you don't see a letter I somewhere on the menu, it's in Russian. Chances are that menu is going to have a letter I on it, which means it's in Ukrainian. So open up your Google app, point it at the menu, select the little camera button there. All right, you see that? Boom. Now you're translating. Okay? Just move it all over the menu. And hey, if it doesn't make sense, then you've probably got the Ukraine or Russian wrong. So just switch it from Ukraine to Russian or Russia to Ukraine and try it then. It should work. The only problem is if the menu has used some weird font. Okay? So if it's a weird font, it may not pick up very well. But most of the time it does. Honestly, most of the time they've got an English menu. Do watch out that your English menu prices are the same as your Ukraine menu prices, because sometimes that's not the case. If you go by our restaurant guide, you will not have that problem. Okay? But next app is Duolingo. As soon as you're done with this video, if you don't already have it on your phone, go put it on your phone. Start learning Russian. Okay? Do it tonight. Don't wait. Do your first couple of lessons. I would also, if you aren't familiar with the Cyrillic alphabet, which is the Russian characters, go ahead and start learning that as well. But you need to go ahead and start learning a little bit. Don't use one method. Don't rely only on Duolingo. Also watch a few YouTube videos. Maybe get Rosetta Stone or Babbel, and use more than one method to start learning some Russian. You're going to need to know some Russian if you're visiting Ukraine. If you're visiting the east of Ukraine, you're going to want to know some Ukrainian. So let's say you don't even want to go to Odessa. You've heard terrible things. I don't know why you would. It's an amazing place. But let's say that you're convinced that you don't ever want to go to Odessa, and you have no interest in spending any time in the east of Ukraine. Start learning Ukrainian, because that's what they speak. They understand Russian. Sometimes they will respond to you in Russian, but they all speak Ukrainian. Okay? So, but for Odessa, you definitely want to speak Russian. What's the other benefit of speaking Russian? It's a very useful language to know, traveling other places than maybe just Ukraine. So, next is a virtual private network. I don't care which one you use. I like ExpressVPN. I'm not currently being paid to tell you that, but maybe one day I will, depending on when you watch this video. But right now, we're not getting paid for that. So just put a VPN on your phone. You're thinking, well, I'm going to get a SIM card and I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. No. More than likely, you are definitely going to use Wi-Fi eventually on your phone. Maybe even you're going to use your apartment Wi-Fi. Well, in Ukraine, many times you have many apartments using the same Wi-Fi, because the apartment owner has 3 apartments and only wants to pay for one set of interwebs. So keep that in mind. So other people are going to be on that network, not just you. And if you use cafe Wi-Fi, or if you're using, heaven forbid, airport Wi-Fi without a VPN, you're a crazy person. So you're in Odessa, you've got your apps on, you've called us, we've taken you to your apartment. Your first night, what are you going to do? Well, you're going to meet your apartment owner, and the first thing you're going to do is make sure the hot water's turned on. I have been going to Ukraine for over 10 years, well, actually for 10 years exactly now, and on at least 3 or 4 occasions, there's been an issue with the hot water. So one of the first things I would do is, if you turn on the faucet and it's not hot, it might take some time. I would just say, hey, is the hot water working? and they'll say yes. And when it doesn't work, it won't be like you're making them do something that's a pain in their ass, because you've already mentioned once that, hey, you know what, the hot water needs to work. Number two, you can do this quickly before they leave, is make sure the Wi-Fi is working. Make sure not only does the passcode work, but once you're connected, that it's actually, working internet, because you can connect to the router and think that it's working, but it's actually not. So you want to make sure that the Wi-Fi works. Next, you want to do a little exploring. I know you're tired. You've probably been on a plane for several hours. You're a little grumpy. You feel like you need a shower. Well, hey, get that shower. But then after that, go outside, explore your area. Find your closest market, find your closest ATM, find your closest cafe, find your closest restaurant, then go home and rest a little bit, because it's going to give you a little bit to think about when you know a little bit about the area and what you want to do for your next couple of days. It's going to keep you from spending too much time inside. A lot of people who I've met spend entirely too much time in their apartment. I am guilty of it too. You're in a new country. You don't need to be in your apartment. You only need to sleep there and bathe there. Maybe occasionally make a meal there, but that's it. Next, food and shopping. All right, so Odessa has unbelievable food. Ukrainian food, local food is amazing. If you like soul food, if you like country food, if you like food from the South, if you like home cooking, you're going to absolutely love Ukrainian local food. But they're also a bit of a foodie culture. And they love Western influences. So anything you can think of is available there to eat, from sushi to pizza. Now, a word on sushi in Ukraine. It's not quite as bad as it was 5 years ago, but still just about every restaurant serves sushi. And sometimes that's okay, but if your pizza joint serves sushi, that can make me a little uncomfortable. Okay, so maybe stick to sushi at sushi restaurants. Ukrainians love sushi for whatever reason. I mean, it's just an oddity of Ukraine. But anyway, long story short, get your sushi at a sushi restaurant. Don't eat the sushi off the pizza menu. Okay, but anyway, most places, like I've said, will have an English menu. Don't be afraid to ask for that. And very importantly, if you go somewhere and it costs you more to eat there than it did at home, something's not right. You got charged the American price. So if you're working with us, or you want to work with us, let us know. We'll look into that for you, because we don't like that. As expats, as local Ukrainians, as people who love Odessa, it angers us when we see a restaurant treating tourists poorly, because a lot of people rely on tourism in Odessa for an income. Our favorite restaurants and cafes. Okay, so this is a pretty good list. If you're there for 2 weeks, you should hit all these. That's my that's my suggestion. Compote. Breakfast in the morning. I think they open at 8, which is early for tourists. So maybe it's a little earlier than that. I don't remember. I'm not usually up at 8. But breakfast, a great cafe, great pastries, and a really good restaurant menu as well. Also, interesting, some of the best service in Ukraine. So let's go ahead and stop right here and let's talk about service in Ukraine. It's worse than the general bad service you get in Europe. Rarely is it anywhere near as good as you would get in the U.S. Nowhere that I have ever traveled to, which isn't a ton of places, generally has as good a service in restaurants as in the U.S. People just don't value customer service like we do in the U.S. That's not saying everywhere in Europe. I have had some wonderful meals in Europe. I have had some wonderful meals with horrible service in Europe. So Ukraine, generally speaking, is worse service than Europe. Good service at Compote, great food, great menu, nice little cafe. It's not terribly spendy. If you're just doing, something small, a little snack and some tea or coffee, you're going to get out of there without being beat up too bad. Their food, if you're having a meal there, is a little more expensive than some places. Lviv chocolate / Lviv coffee. Now, Compote, let me go back to Compote. It's also on Deribassovskaya Street. I'm going to give you a general idea where some of these places are. So, Lviv coffee and / Lviv chocolate. I can't remember if it's Lviv Chocolate Factory or Lviv Coffee Company, or I can't remember. Great little cafe. Great little cafe. Usually very, very busy. And please, 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 please eat a dessert from there. They do such a wonderful job there. So, Pizza Pasta, which is right next door to Compote. Great menu. Generally speaking, good service. And they've got a great outdoor seating area, one of the biggest, just like Compote has an outdoor seating area, just like Lviv Coffee also has an outdoor seating area. I'm a big fan of Pizza Pasta because of the diversity of their menu, and generally speaking, the food I get from there is very good. The next one is one of my favorite restaurants in all of Ukraine, not to mention Odessa, is Dva Karla, which means two Karla. It is actually not local Ukrainian food. It is actually local Moldovan food. Moldova is situated very close to Odessa, and there are some strong Moldovan influences, and the Ukrainian local cuisine and the local Moldovan cuisine is not that much different. But to be specifically correct, they are a Moldovan local food restaurant, not necessarily a Ukraine. Does that mean that you can't get borscht? No, that means you can get borscht. You can get borscht anywhere from Moldova to Ukraine to the whole of Russia. Next on the list is Beer Garden. Beer Garden is in City Garden, and it's like a German, I guess, what would you say? It's kind of like a German steakhouse kind of thing. You know, it's got the big steins of beer. It's kind of got that German restaurant feel on the inside, but it's decidedly Ukrainian. So, but absolutely great steaks. You're going to see in the next slide that I have steakhouse listed as a bar and not a restaurant, even though steakhouse restaurant on Deribassovskaya is in fact a restaurant, and not a terrible one. But Beer Garden has great meat. Whether you want a steak or you want a big huge plate of meat for drinking beer, salty meat for drinking beer, or you want carpaccio, they have a great carpaccio, which is one of my favorite things in the world. Buffalo 99. This is headed down Deribassovskaya, headed towards the ocean. It is definitely a tourist restaurant, which I definitely tend to shy away from. But it only seems to be a tourist restaurant during the day. You'll see a few expats there in the evening, but it really turns into a sports bar at night where people are watching football / soccer. So I'm always a little confused. And other than Compote, it has the best service in Ukraine. Just unbelievably good service, seconded only to Compote and later on in the list, Tavernetta. Next is City Market. City Market is like, there's no food trucks in Ukraine. There's no pop-ups in Ukraine, but it's kind of got that feel. It's a big place you walk into, like a food court or a food mall or something like that. But don't think food court like fast food. I actually do think food court like fast food, because that's actually exactly what it is. Downstairs is all sort of fast foodish kind of they have Mexican food, they have pizza and pasta. Let's see what else they have. What else do they have there? They got some vegan shit. They got pastries. They have a juice bar. They've got coffee, obviously. They've got hot dogs. They've got a wine bar upstairs. They got a steak place upstairs that does great steaks. They've got a seafood place upstairs that does great seafood. Go here often. Next is one of my absolute favorite restaurants, Haji Bey. Haji Bey is a Crimean Tartar restaurant that just has unbelievable food. Like I said, if you promise, you have to promise me that you're going to have the carpaccio when you go to Beer Garden. Well, you're just going to have to promise me that you go to Haji Bey. It is just great food, and it is not expensive. Do yourself a favor. Go to Haji Bey. Next is Kinkali, or Kinkali. Kinkali that's a Georgian dumpling. So this is Georgian food. I love Georgian dumplings. I love Georgian food. I can just go from Haji Bey to Kinkali over and over and over again and be good. Never go anywhere else to eat, and I'll be totally happy. And both of them are not terribly expensive. Now, if you go to a Georgian restaurant, now you have to promise me you're going to eat the harcho. Harcho is their big, beefy, hearty soup. It's not vegetable-y like a borscht. It's a meat soup. It's thin like a soup. It is not necessarily a stew. But good God, is it so good. Next is Fanconi. Now, Fanconi is not my favorite restaurant, except for when I'm drunk at night and everything else is closed. If everything else is closed, Fanconi is open. It's 24 hours. The kitchen is always open. The service is always decent. If you go with some friends of mine, the service is going to be fantastic because they're regulars there. I like Fanconi. They do some fun stuff there from time to time. DJs, fashion shows. It's not a bad place. It's just not my normal jam for a place to eat. Okay? But at night, love it. Or early in the morning, you want some eggs, love it. Smile Food. See the little asterisk there? It's not a restaurant. So you're hungover. You cannot get out of the apartment. You're completely slaughtered. It's not going to happen. Smile Food delivers. They deliver everything. They'll even deliver sushi, of course. Next is Amsterdam. Amsterdam, a bit like Fanconi, they're not 24 hours, but if the mood strikes, I will go there. It's a little bit expensive. Great cocktails, really good food. I like their food. Now, it's kind of small, fancy restaurant food, but they do a good job. So they're on the list. Next is Tavernetta. Tavernetta is not near Diribassovskaya. You can walk there. It's definitely walkable. But it's a bit of a haul. The same people that own Compote own Tavernetta. Tavernetta is an Italian restaurant and is truly the second best Italian restaurant I have ever eaten at in my life. Ever eaten at? Yes. The second best Italian restaurant where I have ever eaten. That still sounds wrong. Anyway, number one is, just for information's sake, is actually in a strip mall in Tucson, Arizona. Mary Berry. It's their version of Starbucks, except they do smoothies too. But yeah, Mary Berry is their version of Starbucks, kind of corporate looking on the inside in terms of, like corporate restaurant looking. It's not very imaginative, but it is neat. It is clean. Mary Berry. There's a couple of other little coffee chains. Mary Berry seems to be my favorite. The other ones are fine too. And finally, Mario's Pizza. Mario's Pizza is right next to Buffalo 99, a place we're going to mention in a second. Mario's Pizza and Buffalo 99 are all owned by the same restaurant group. And they all do a pretty good job of service. And they all have prices. Actually, Mario's Pizza is a little lower than Buffalo 99. They do great pizza. Their New York pizza is really good. It's got a lot of good meats on it. But it's still sparsely populated top of a pizza. But it is tasty. And they do a lot of other things that are very good. I just absolutely love that place as well. It's not one I hit all the time, because normally if I'm eating pizza, it's because I'm hungover and I'm ordering it. And where I've been tending to stay recently, there's an Olio's Pizza that didn't make the list, but it would probably be my honorable mention. Olio's Pizza is pretty good. Okay, so we got the bars broken up into tourist and non-tourist. Buffalo 99, definitely a tourist bar. Okay. Like I said, at night, the locals show up and it turns into a sports bar. But generally speaking, it's definitely tourist. Central Bar, not a bad little bar. But it's definitely touristy, and a little bit expensive. Fanconi, who we've talked about in terms of eating there, is a great little bar. Not a great little bar. It's a great, huge bar and restaurant. And like I said, it's open 24 hours, which is one of the reasons it's also made this list. Amsterdam, who we've already mentioned. I like it better as a bar than I do a restaurant, even though their food is very good. But I like it better as a sitting outside, smoking hookah, and having a couple of beers or a couple of cocktails. Steakhouse, which I mentioned briefly earlier, is a restaurant, a steakhouse, obviously. And I like it better for sitting outside on Dia de Basovskaya and people watching. The drinks are a little expensive, but generally speaking, they've also got decent bartenders that'll chat you up and do a good job. Okay, so bars that are for locals. Any of these bars are going to have some local people in it. I don't mean when you walk in, it's going to be wall-to-wall Americans. That's not what I'm saying. It's actually going to be probably more Ukrainian than anything else. But it's also going to be peppered with people from all over as well. Friends and Beer, which is on Dia de Basovskaya. And by the way, Central Bar is not on Dia de Basovskaya, but it's a short walk. We've already talked about Fanconi, Amsterdam. Steakhouse is on Dia de Basovskaya. Friends and Beer, my favorite dive bar in Odessa, and it is just around the corner from Mario's Pizza and Buffalo 99. Again, like I think I've said, they're owned by the same restaurant group. They do a great job there. The service is hit or miss. They've got an outside seating area, which is normally pretty sparsely populated during the day, but very busy at night. They've also got an inside area, which is downstairs. There are a lot of restaurants and places that are underground, kind of. If you've ever been to any big city, you know what I mean. There are rooms under the main entrances to places where people put snuggeries and restaurants and bars and that sort of thing. That's what Friends and Beer is. Got a decent menu and used to be cheap beer, but again, with the price differences between the hryvnia and the dollar now, that is less so. And if you're not there in high season, they don't put all of their normal beers on tap. Sometimes they've got a limited beer selection, but I like the place. It's sort of dive barish, and I like it. The next one is Nut. That is not OPEX. That is actually Russian. That is OREX. So that's Orex, which means nut in English, which is another dive bar, which I absolutely love, and is also another one that's underground. And it is not on Dia de Basovskaya. You're going to have to find this one and get to it. It's actually a little off the beaten path, but well worth it if you want to do something local. It's a younger place. I'm 47 years old, and I am always the oldest person in there. So Molodust is, in terms of prices, the place is super cheap. Great place to go. Typical dive bar, which is just beer drinking food on the menu. So Molodust is off of, not far from Dia de Basovskaya. I can't remember. Might be off of Reshev. Actually, I don't know where it's off of, so I'm not even going to attempt. But it's not far from Dia de Basovskaya. Again, Amsterdam's on the list here. It's made it 3 times, and it's somehow not at all my favorite. But I've got it on the locals because, kind of like Buffalo 99, at night it gets way more local than it gets tourist. Truman Bar. You're probably going to take a taxi to this one. This one you're not going to be able to walk to from Dia de Basovskaya. And it's definitely a local spot. Truman Bar is typical 20s and 30s hangout for people in their late 20s and early 30s who've got a decent job and like to get off work and go drink a little bit and raise a little hell. That's this place. And then again, City Market, because like I mentioned, they do have bars. They do serve alcohol. Obviously, there's more than 3 supermarket chains in Odessa, but these are the 3 you're going to find near Dia de Basovskaya. These are the 3 that you're going to be able to easily walk to, depending on where your apartment is on that street. So, Silpo, or Les Silpo, is Silpo, that's Ukrainian. You see the I. That's how you know you're looking at something in Ukrainian. And the next is Tavreya V. B is V in Russian, by the way. This one you can find little ones that are like little bodegas like you would find in New York, and you can find full-on supermarkets. And next is the cheaper one, on Dia de Basovskaya, the cheap supermarket, and that's Dva Shaga, and I think I'm pronouncing that right. I don't know what a shaga is, but it means two, whatever shaga is. And it's not as clean. It doesn't have near as good a produce or selection, but it's going to have the cheaper beer, which may be important to you. Travel in town with taxis. So you've got your apps on your phone. You should be, if you don't speak the local language, you should be outside waiting, looking for the car. Hanging out with Ukrainians, you're going to see that they will sit inside and make the driver wait. You don't want to risk that. You don't want to miss which kind of car it is. You don't want them calling and talking to you and asking you questions that you can't answer because you don't speak the language. You want to be waiting on the car. And just like every other rideshare app, it's going to tell you the driver's name. It's going to tell you what kind of car it is and the license plate number on the car. And I also don't suggest trying to get adventurous and getting on the local transportation, the local buses or trolleys. Yeah, it's dirt cheap. It is dirt cheap to travel via Ukrainian public transportation. But you don't speak Russian, most likely. And you don't speak Ukrainian. And you can't figure out timetables. And you can't ask for help. And, don't do it. Nightlife. So, I've already advised you to stay on Deribasovskaya. From Deribasovskaya, there are clubs nearby. There are great restaurants. There are bars. You can go sing karaoke. There's tons of things to do. You can also get a taxi and go to Arcadia. You can go to the beach clubs. Unbelievable fun nightlife in Ukraine. So when you go out at night, this is really where you get yourself in trouble spending too much money. You've been drinking. You don't really trying to save money at that point. You're just trying to have a good time. And you're prone to do stupid shit like, doing bottle service. Now, granted, you may need a table. So I'm not begrudging you going somewhere where you need to reserve a table and pay for it. That's fine. That's just part of going out at night. That's not a big deal. But do you really want to be that guy that gets bottle service? Maybe you do. Maybe that's your deal. You're not worried about money. Good for you, buddy. Congratulations. But I find it a bit ostentatious. I find it a bit on the nose. But you know what? If that's what your deal, do it. You're going to pay an arm and a leg for it just like you would anywhere else that has bottle service. Next, Ukraine has become a tipping culture. The gratuity is expected in Ukraine. I tip generally 10%, and not like I do here in the U.S. where I generally tip 20%, 15% if you suck, because I have worked in the food industry, and so I try to always tip 20%. In Ukraine, 10% is a gracious plenty, 15% if they are awesome, and 20% isn't necessary. It'd be like tipping 30 or 50% in the U.S. You're just trying to show off at that point. Where you can find some English speakers. So you don't understand anything anybody said, and it's getting a little annoying, so you want to find somebody who speaks English. That's not going to be the case if you're on Deribasovskaya. You can't go sit at any restaurant during the day, during the high season, and not be around at least a few people speaking some English. So I encourage you to introduce yourself, and to be cool, and to be fun, and to be interesting. And I discourage you from being a bit of a douche, which that happens. Let's go ahead and hit the elephant in the room. You're probably going there to date and to see women and maybe find a wife or whatever, and I'm probably talking to a man right now. And sometimes people like to alpha up a little bit, want to peacock and pull those shoulders back and try to be Billy Badass, as we say here in the South. That happens in Ukraine just like it happens everywhere else. I want to dissuade you from being that guy, because we, as people who go there often, and we as expats, and we as locals, see you coming a mile away. So let's avoid that, and let's be friendly, and let's introduce ourselves, and let's have a good time. We want to talk to you. We want to know who you are and where you're from and why you've come to Odessa. We've got some great information to impart, and we look forward to meeting you. But let's keep the douchebaggery down to the barest minimum. The do's and don'ts. Here's some good advice. Do try your Russian. you want to try to speak some Russian, even if it's just hello, goodbye, how are you, dva piva pожалуйста, which means 2 beers, please. Speak some Russian while you're there. You will hate yourself if you don't try out your Russian and practice your Russian. Introduce yourself, which we've gone over. Tip 10% or more. There's an exception to that. We'll get to it at the end. Have fun and be fun. Explore the city. I understand if you don't want to go too far off of Deribasovskaya your first trip. It's not necessary for you to. You may want to, and do that if you want to. But it's not necessary. But explore as much as you are comfortable with. Do not, under any circumstance, spend too much time in your friggin' apartment. Go to the beach. There are several great beaches in Ukraine. Several great beach clubs. Do your research. We can help you with that. Definitely go to the beach and try new food. Do not go to Ukraine to eat McDonald's and Domino's. Okay? Try local Ukrainian cuisine. How do you go to Ukraine and not eat borscht? I don't know. Try the borscht. It's like vegetable soup. If you've ever had Southern style vegetable soup in the U.S., then you've had something very similar to borscht, and you're going to love it. Okay, the don'ts. So let's say you've met somebody, or you're sitting with a group of people that speak a little bit of English, and you're using idioms and colloquialisms, which is basically you're saying things that only Americans would understand, or only Western Europeans would understand, or only people from Australia would understand. It's not only do they don't understand it, they find it a little bit rude. So careful with the idioms, careful with the colloquialisms that don't translate. Don't be overly loud and crass. Hey, Americans, I'm talking to you. Hey, Australians, I'm talking to you. Hey, Russians, you're going to do it anyway. That's just your nature. So, but don't be overly loud and crass like Americans tend to do. I'm guilty of it from time to time. Australians are always guilty of it, just like Americans are always guilty of it. I've occasionally seen the rare Scotsman do it from time to time. Irishmen occasionally, but rare. Germans, when they get juiced up and drunk, they'll definitely get a little loud. Just try to behave yourself. Don't forget to tip. You see right here next to it, this means you, Europe. Just because you don't tip at home doesn't mean you don't tip when you go on vacation. So spend the money. Don't be too drunk. Notice I put 2 in there. Obviously, you're going to get hammered and have a good time. Don't be so drunk you can't protect yourself. Don't be so drunk you do something stupid and embarrass me as a fellow American or Westerner, okay? Keep the ass showing to a bare minimum. Don't sit in your apartment, which we have said. And don't just do tourist things. How fun is it just to go to a place and just do the touristy things? Go to one of these more local bars. Go to one of these more local restaurants. Do yourself a favor and do that. Don't just do the crypt tour and go to the locals. Go to the touristy places like the beach clubs during the day and this, that, and that. Do some more local type stuff. And try new things. Try food that you don't understand. Okay? Try to meet people that you may not immediately be comfortable meeting. Okay? The more effort you put into it, the more fun you're going to have. You're going to a foreign country for a reason. Okay? You're going to have to do some foreign things in a foreign country. That's the whole fun of it. Okay, going home and taking a taxi. This may not really deserve its own slide, but I'm going to give it to you anyway. Feel free to take a taxi to the airport. If you're using our service or you're talking to your host and they're going to charge you $25 each way to the airport, which isn't terrible. It's expensive, no doubt. That's expensive. $25 is definitely worth it. Your first trip from the airport to your apartment. It's not worth it after that. After your first trip, you're an idiot for paying that. But there's nothing wrong with paying your apartment owner $25 to get you from the airport to your apartment. All right, guys. So I hope this was useful for you. The next video in this Getting You Ready for Your First Trip series will be actually a budget series. We're going to go through each line item of a budget and what it would cost you to go to Ukraine. We'll even provide you with a a Google spreadsheet for you to plug in your own numbers so you have some good idea of what it's going to cost you. Like and subscribe. We're a growing channel. We're brand new. We need your help. You got some good information here. So if you liked it, we ask you to go ahead and ring that little bell there and get a notification every time we have a great video for you. Talk to you soon.